Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to thank our panelists and the interpreters. Okay, so as you know, we're here today to talk about urban mining, and we have three great panelists to talk about this with us this afternoon. I'll introduce them in greater detail later. We have Martín Lallana connecting from the Basque Country in the north of the Iberian Peninsula. We have Felix Best Agorvor joining from Ghana and Clàudia Bosch joining from Catalonia. Before introducing them, I'd just like to give us some background on the topic we're here to discuss today. Basically, we would like to talk about urban mining as one of the necessary measures to gradually reduce extractivism of minerals. And we think it's a necessary alternative, which of course won't solve all of the needs we have in terms of mineral with the current level of consumption, but it could be a measure that helped us advance forward towards the post-extractivism area. So where are we placed from? So we're talking of a context of climate change where it seems like at long last, all institutions, or almost all institutions, there's a growing consensus that we need to take measures to adapt to climate change, and there's a need to phase out fossil fuels. The problem there is that if we want to keep this current levels of consumptions just by changing these sources of energy to move to these new alternative energy sources, this will require new minerals, which are also finite resources, and they are distributed very unequally in our planet. So they're critical materials for the green transition, as we know, and the extraction of these minerals is having huge impacts on the environment and also in terms of human rights. So we could say that we are faced with a new logic of green extractivism, which changes the focus of what is being extracted. We're no longer talking so much about extracting fossil fuels or other forms of extraction in the previous model, which are still continuing. It's not as if the transition is happening with the speed we would need it to happen, but we are seeing a shift of extractivism towards other minerals that are necessary for the green transition. So even if this green extractivism takes place in other places, I mean, at the end, these critical materials for the green transition are distributed in different parts of the world. So we see new focus of conflict due to extractivism in places where till now maybe there weren't so many conflicts. But once this happens, the consequences are just as dangerous as the ones we've seen with classic extractivism. And today we're here to talk about other forms of gaining access to these minerals, but we know extractivism has impact on what Latin American feminists call our body land. We cannot disconnect what happens from our land, from the environment, with what happens to us, the people living on this planet. So the idea that our land, our territory is a living body that we need to protect, and our physical bodies are also something we need to protect. So after this brief introduction as to why we think it's interesting to try coming up with other ways of gaining access to these minerals through other pathways, we will also talk about waste, which in many cases is the source of urban minerals. Waste is also a big problem globally. The UN Global E-Waste Monitor shows us that e-waste have reached a global record, and it's increasing 5 times faster than the recycling rate, and the recycling rates in some places only represents 1%. So when we talk of rare Earth. So there's a long way to go in terms of recycling. And this is what we've as urban mining, which may seem a more attractive term. So we think that recovering these minerals that have already been extracted, so the impacts of extracting these minerals have already happened. So recovering and recycling these from e-waste and other forms of waste is a path to explore. We know that this won't be able to meet the current demand, which is growing for these minerals, but we think it may be a contributing factor, and that before exploiting and opening new mines, we need to make sure that this urban mining, which has a lower environmental and climate impact, is also made the most of. We don't know whether we'll be able to talk about it today, but we also think it's a way of giving visibility and acknowledgement to all of those workers working in the recycling sector. Many of them work informally, but others also work in a very precarious and dangerous industrial sector where there are high rates of accidents at the workplace. So we need to give recognition to this sector to be able to bring value and better conditions to these jobs. And just to give some other background, when it comes to public policies, the European Union, in its recent law on critical raw materials, has set that 25% of these critical materials should come from recycling in 2030, and we're far from reaching this percentage. So after this short intro, I'm sure you have many questions. Some of the questions we had is, what is the true potential of urban mining to transition towards a post-extractivist world, as our Latin American colleagues say? And for that, as I was saying, we have three great panelists. We have Martín Lallana, who is a researcher in ecosocial transition, and he's currently working this in the Lab Union in the Basque Country. He is the co-author of a book titled Minerals for Energy Transition and Digital Transition in Spain, Demand, Recycling and Saving Measures. It's a publication from Friends of the Earth Spain. Felix said he could introduce himself, but I'll introduce him very shortly. He studied at the Ghana University, has trained in data distraction, and I hope, Felix, you can tell us more about what data distraction is, as well as e-waste. And right now he's leading an organization called 5 Seconds Connect Ghana. And last but not least, we have Clàudia Bosch, who is the coordinator of the campaign for fair electronics at SETEM Catalunya. We will start off by giving the floor to Clàudia, then Felix, and then Martín. And without further ado, I'd give the floor to Clàudia, and I'd like to ask you, what is the global situation of e-waste, and what impact this having in terms of human rights, both in Catalonia and around the world? And also to share some thoughts on what we could do from here to think up of alternatives. So Clàudia, whenever you like, the floor is yours, and thank you for being here. For my short presentation, I prepared some slides, some short slides, just to walk you through my presentation. So let me share screen so that you can see this, okay? Okay, so as Julia was rightly saying, and she gave a very complete overview of the topic, I am from SETEM Catalunya. I'm in charge of the campaign for fair electronics at SETEM. And what we try doing through this campaign is to give visibility to the social and environmental impacts that happen throughout the life cycle of our electronic devices. Historically, we have focused mostly on information and technology, that is computers, smartphones and others, because almost everyone has a smartphone or computer. It's a way of reaching out to citizens in a more direct way. As you can see in this image, we have a representation of the life cycle. It's very beautiful in a circle, but the reality is that this process is much more linear and it isn't as circular as it should be, because as we will see, the production of all this technology has a huge social and environmental cost. Usually, when we do awareness campaigns, one of the things we say is that a smartphone, for example, has more than 60 different elements from the periodic table, and that many of these elements are extracted from the Earth. And here you can see a map showing where the minerals are located around the world. And I was asked to give a brief introduction to the impacts of mining. I'll do this very quickly. I must say that impacts depend on the type of mine, whether it's an open pit mine or not. But generally speaking, they are very polluting. They pollute water, they pollute land and air. I'm being asked if I'm speaking in English. No, I'm not speaking in English. Okay, it also leads to huge levels of deforestation and a loss of biodiversity. Mining is responsible for a large proportion of greenhouse gas emissions, which are contributing to climate change. And it also has big social impacts. There are different types of mining. We have small-scale artisanal mining, more industrial mining. But in general, we could say that mining accounts for expropriation of land and displacement. Some data, in the past 10 years, there have been more than 600 reports of human rights violations linked to the extraction of minerals for the green transition. And since 2012, there have been more than 19 environmental defenders killed. Through mining, we also see labor exploitation. We see mining workers working in unsafe conditions, in dangerous conditions. In informal mining, they don't wear personal protection equipment, and this can also have serious impacts on health. Another big topic are minerals in conflict, and that is in certain parts of the world, conflicts and mineral extraction is being used to fund these armed conflicts. And right now we have brands like Apple or Alphabet or some of the big companies, none of them can be certain that the minerals in their devices are free of these minerals. Because even if you say that you're trying to do your best not to source minerals from mines linked to this type of conflicts, what happens in reality is that everything gets mixed up in sludges, and it makes it very difficult to be certain that our technology is free of conflict. I'd also like to make a special mention to women and minorities. It depends on the context, but there are impacts that are more specific on women in places where there are large mining exploitations. We see precarious conditions that lead to violence against women, sexual violence, or in informal mines, women usually carry out the worst paid jobs, or they're highly stigmatized. And exposure to these toxic minerals also have impacts on their reproductive health. Here we have some examples, but since I was asked to give a shorter introduction, I can always share my presentation with you so that you can read through it. And after seeing that the mining that is required to produce these electronic devices has this high social and environmental impact, and I haven't mentioned the production phase of these devices where the very serious labor rights violations also in the marketing of these devices. we need to take care of this technology. We need to make it last longer, and we need to manage electronic waste because of the huge costs that come from manufacturing these waste. The reality, though, is that we continue to create pain, sweat, and tears and wasting materials. Here we see the different electronic waste, and here we see some of the main reasons why electronic waste is one of the type of waste that is growing more rapidly around the world. There is a growing digitalization of our daily lives and a growing use of these technologies, even more so now with hydroelectric powers and low emission technologies. And this growth in electronic waste isn't going hand in hand with the necessary development of infrastructures for recycling. Then there's the issue of planned obsolescence. There are two types: planned obsolescence, and after all of the barriers put in place by the industry to force us to buy new electronic devices, meaning that our devices are programmed to stop working after a certain time, forcing us to download software updates that leave our devices outdated, or because the batteries stop working. And then there are many barriers to repairs. And then there's the perceived obsolescence, and that is the popular belief that anything new is better. And some people want to buy the latest model of iPhone because it's better, lighter, smaller, and it's not as fashionable if you don't buy a new phone. There's a low level of repairs and many barriers to repairs, as I said, imposed by the industry. So I don't know if you can see my presentation on screen, but in any case, from the e-waste monitor from 2024 with data from 2022, I've just picked some of the most important data. That is that in 2022, 62 billion kilograms of e-waste was generated, and only this part here in green has been documented and has been recycled in an environmentally adequate way. What happens here, and this is what happens with the rest. This line here are systems that are recycled, but in an unsustainable way. Let me move my screen up. Here, these other 18 billion kilograms are e-waste that are dealt with in middle and low income countries that do not have the adequate means, or that are recycled in the informal sector. And here's what is estimated to end up in waste and dumps. Here we see a graph. These data are per capita. It's not the global production of e-waste. Europe is at the lead. But per capita, Europe produces the greatest amount of e-waste. And here on the right, you can see the type of EEE, that is smaller equipment. And this map is a way of illustrating. This isn't from the 22 monitor, it's from 2020. In green, we see the main generators of electronic waste, and in red, the recipients, because e-waste is exported, in theory, for it to be repaired. But very often what happens is that we have the Basel Convention that tries regulating things so that e-waste isn't exported to other countries. Sometimes in the batches, there are products that are in theory sent for repair, but they become mixed up with devices that cannot be repaired. So a part of them can be repaired, but many of them end up in dumps. I'd also like to mention that sometimes we talk of these dumps I mean, I don't want to be paternalistic here, but I would like to recognize that in the case of Accra, there is a huge community of people doing repairs, and the repair rate is very high. But this doesn't mean it's okay for the global north to send their waste to other parts of the world. There's another impactful figure here, that is the money that has been lost because of e-waste management external effects. It's 37 billion US dollars, and in the scale you see the benefits and the cost, and what is heavier here is the social and environmental costs that have been externalized. And in this light pink, we see the cost of the management. So we see that many of the costs are due to the damage caused. When we look at the benefits in the dark green, we see materials that have been able to re-enter value chains. And in the lighter green or blue, we see emissions that have been prevented by doing so. So we're talking of a big loss of money. And before we go deeper into the impacts, I also wanted to bring you some data on how the situation is in Catalonia. Spain basically is on the average rate of recycling. Around 40% of what is thrown away is disposed of adequately. Catalonia is more or less the same, but there's one figure which makes me especially cross, and that is that from the goals set out when it comes to repairing for devices to be reused, we know in green disposal items, there are things that could be easily repaired and reused, and many of the devices are prematurely recycled. And this entails a loss of energy and therefore is not interesting. From the targets set, the value is very low. We have a very low ability to repair compared to what we could do. So just to explain in greater depth the impacts of this informal and environmentally unsustainable way of managing waste. People working in the informal sector do this with no protection equipment, and they're exposed to hazardous substances such as lead, mercury. There's also a filtration of these pollutants into the land, the air, and water, which then enters the food chain, and it can end up affecting the whole of the community. It also has impacts on health with respiratory disease, cancer, and other diseases, loss of materials. Sometimes in the informal waste management, they only take the materials that of a greater value and they discard other less valuable materials. And for me, the most important thing is that this is perpetuating the situation, the things that we don't want to manage in the global north because we don't want to, we export them to the global south without worrying about the impacts this may have. And this perpetuates inequalities. I also wanted to emphasize how this has a specific impact on women. Generally speaking, the context varies from one country to another, but based on gender systems and gender norms, women have a lower employment rate in formal e-waste recycling, but they have a high level of participation in informal waste management, the same as in mining. They very often, and this e-waste management has impacts on their reproductive health, and we see the same impacts repeating themselves in areas of great precarity curiousness, this perpetuates violence against women. And then there's another point I haven't mentioned, that is the care services. Women who are working in this informal sector, if the children fall ill or their parents fall ill because of these pollutants, it's always women who take on this care. And this means they are paid less than their male counterparts. So what can we do? From SETEM, we've been working on raising awareness on a critical form of consuming, and this starts off by rejecting aggressive marketing campaigns that entice us to consume in a compulsive way, to reduce consumption, to repair, to renovate, that is to give a new use to things that are still functioning, to allow the recycling industry to recover these raw materials, etc. We think much more should be invested in the recovery of the materials. And I'm sure we'll hear more about this later on, because times are urgent now with the green transition and with the growing market of e-vehicles and solar panels. The number of waste will grow, and we have to close the circle. We cannot continue allowing ourselves the luxury of continuing with this extractivism which causes so much harm. And well, another thing that we advocate for is that as part of the Right to Repair, Europe's Right to Repair campaign, we would promote a more sustainable use of materials, making them long-lasting, making them easier to repair than others. And with that, I would end my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be delighted to answer. And we have to close the circle. We cannot continue allowing ourselves the luxury of continuing with this extractivism which causes so much harm. And well, another thing that we advocate for is that as part of the Right to Repair, Europe's Right to Repair campaign, we would promote a more sustainable use of materials, making them long-lasting, making them easier to repair than others. And with that, I would end my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be delighted to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clàudia. Thank you for your presentation. It's been highly interesting. I think your mapping was really useful in order for us to understand where we are. We're going to leave the questions for the end. So if anyone had questions for Clàudia, please take them down on notes and write them down. You can also write them in the Q&A box if you want, and we'll recap later with the questions. So our next speaker is Felix Best Agorvor. He is from Accra, Ghana, and we wanted to ask him what the situation of e-waste is in the city and in the suburbs of Accra. Ghana is one of the countries, as Clàudia said, receiving major amounts of e-waste. We would like to know the impacts of this in terms of human rights, but also we'd like to know about the role of what recycling in terms of urban mining could be. And also we would like to ask him what the main challenges are in order for us to carry out this recycling. You have the floor, Felix.
Okay, so my name is Felix Best Agorvor. I'm the CEO of 5 Seconds Connect Ghana. I come from Ghana, Tema or Accra to be precise. And my organization is registered by the laws of Ghana, we were incorporated 2023, April to be precise. And what we actually do is we are into e-waste management. And e-waste management here, what we specifically do is that we do e-waste collection, we do data distraction, and we do what we call segregation, and also we do the advocacy aspect of it. And also we have an MOU or a partnership with Centu Ghana Limited, where all the waste that we collected, especially the e-waste, we send it to Centu Ghana Limited for recycling, because they are the only recycling plant in Ghana which process e-waste, including Zoom Lion, which also have a bit of e-waste recycling plants, but largely it's Centu Ghana Limited who have the plant purposely for e-waste recycling and management. And so having said that, I've also worked with British Telecom. They actually introduced me to e-waste management, and they taught me what we call data distraction. So data distraction is also it's largely part of our work. And that is what we do. I have a team of 5 people that I work with because we started not quite long. So I have only 5 teams that I work with. So that is basically about our organization. Okay, with regards to e-waste in Ghana and specifically Accra, e-waste is one of the major problem, or let me say challenges that we face in Ghana. Okay, so it's one of the major challenges that we have in Ghana. And I must say e-waste management in Ghana is a gray area. No doubt about it. It's a very gray area. It's an area that is not known to many people, because anytime you appear in seminars, workshops, and conferences, it's like many people, it's just because of continuous advocacy and news that are being generated. Now the country or government or policymakers are becoming abreast with e-waste. And so it's a very, I must say, in a whole, I must say it's a gray area. But we're doing what we can do. So there are not enough policy to guide e-waste in Ghana. Having said that, we all know e-waste is basically electronic and electrical waste is what we are talking about here. And so this electronic and electrical waste, we have some minerals, some very, very vital minerals in them, which are lithium, gold, copper, cobalt, and all the precious platinum, mercury are all found in this electronic and electrical waste. And so people knew about that. And so what they do is that in their way, they try to mine this, which we also call it urban.
Felix, now we can hear you.
Uh,
We lost you.
You can hear me now.
Okay. Yeah, no. Okay, you're here again. Yeah. We are not hearing it. Felix, I'm sorry. We are not hearing you now.
So
Let's see again. Let's try
I
again.
say, can you hear me now?
Now, yes, yeah, we lost you the last part. Yeah, can you repeat?
Okay. Okay, so what I'm saying is that but you get the introductory part of it. Please, did you get the introductory part of it? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we got the introduction. It's just the last part where they didn't hear you.
So what I'm basically saying that e-waste is basically an electronic and these gadgets or these items have in them some precious minerals such as gold, silver, cobalt, platinum, lithium, and all the precious minerals that you can think of. And so currently, let me zoom into the situation in Ghana. Currently, Ghana generates 52 tons of e-waste annually. That is by a professor, from the University of Ghana, which conducted a research. Ghana generated 52,000 tons of e-waste in Ghana, and Accra alone carry about 99% of that e-waste. Only 5% out of these 52,000 tons of e-waste that Ghana generates, only 5% is about 5% is processed or is recycled. So it tells you what is happening in Ghana. And like I said, there are no enough policies to guide the e-waste management. So it's a challenge, and the conditions under which e-waste is managed, or are the conditions under which these items are being collected from the environment, is very, very hazardous. And so now policymakers are coming to terms with the challenges that it poses to the country, especially the major cities, where the e-waste get into our gutters, get into our environment, choke the gutters, which cause flooding. They pollute the soil, the acid from the car batteries and the mobile phone batteries pollute our soil. It's very hazardous. It even gets to our water bodies and all manner of things. Policymakers are now in terms with the challenges. So something is being done, but at a very low rate, because like I said, it's a very gray area in Ghana. And so the conditions precedence to e-waste is not properly, allayed. So having said that, if you go to Agbogboshi, that is where this, excuse for lack of a better word, these street children and people who knew this, a few people, let me say a lay people who also knew the minerals that are in these items, go about collect them. And what they do is that they don't do the proper segregation of e-waste, or they don't do proper sorting of this e-waste. What they do is that largely they burn them to get the copper out of it, to get the gold out of it. And so if you go to Agbogboshi currently, and Agbogboshi also is close to Odo River, the Odo River, which have its source from, it's called Odo, straight to the sea, and it pollutes. They go about polluting the water body over there, and in a nutshell, enter into the sea, which we all know it affects aquatic lifestyle and affect human. So there, even though e-waste has its own economic benefit, it also have its own environmental benefit and hazards, and also it poses health hazard if it is not managed properly. So let me deal with the environmental hazard. Because they don't have the modern technology, they don't have the technology in collecting and segregating and recycle this waste, they end up burning it and they flare the smoke into the atmosphere. And we all know what smoke does to the ozone layer, which in a nutshell causes climate change. When we come in terms of the economic aspect of it, because of the money they get from it, or because of the employment, they also engage in that as their daily source of livelihood. And so I think around that area, it serves as an employment to them. When it comes in terms of the health issues as well, because of there's no proper regulatory framework, there's no proper policy, they are not well trained in the collection of these e-waste and its proper management, they end up, causing havoc, causing harm, jeopardizing their health, because some of them collect these things with their bare hands, they burn them, or they inhale the smoke, or the acid. If you go there and you see for yourself, you see the acid from the batteries, from the gadget, peeling off, giving them skin cancers and all manner of lungs diseases and all of that. That is the aspect of the health hazard e-waste collection and their unregulated and their unhygienic condition posed to people who engage them, which also is abuse to their human right. And that producers pay policy is not well implemented. It's not even implemented in Ghana. We have it in our books, it's there, the money comes, and the guys who go about collecting these things from the environment, they don't get that producer pay policy clause that are in our laws. And so they also find their ways to do it. And it's abuse of their right, because it's their right that when they go out to collect these things, they get something out of it, so that in a nutshell, they are also helping clean the environment, even though it's giving them some kind of employment, economic benefit. And so I think that is the challenge that we need to address, so that that policy should also be implemented. And people who engage in this e-waste collection in Ghana must be properly trained, because if you zoom into Ghana and look at what is happening now, it's total murder, it's genocide that is happening, because Ghana is known to be a mineral-rich country in the West Africa, and Ghana almost is the second country who have the largest deposit of gold and other minerals in Ghana. Recently, we found lithium. And so these regulatory framework are there, but they are not implemented to the latter. So if you hear the news now, currently, what is making the rounds, the news that is making rounds in Ghana is galamsey, which is illegal mining, where people go and mine, both urban mining and this natural mining, where they go and they engage in it illegally under no control. So they end up destroying our forests, polluting our soil, polluting our water bodies. So children are being born with all manners of deformity and strange health condition, physical conditions that we've never seen in our history before. And so the onus lies on we, the civil society, we, the sector players, to engage in serious advocacy, serious training, to be able to properly engage this youth, this teeming youth in proper, responsible, both mining and urban mining. And so these are the challenges, the health where people go about doing this thing without thinking of their health benefit. The challenges are about our environment, where they destroy our environment and pose health conditions, and so have you. The government, because they are not they have not been abreast with the benefit, the economic benefit of urban mining or this e-waste management. They leave it ajar, which if you look at it carefully and we properly tackle it, it can generate about 1 million jobs in Ghana to employ our youth, estimatedly. I see me being in e-waste manager. I think that if e-waste is properly regulated, there are proper laws and regulations, proper policy in place, it can generate a lot of jobs for our team youth, and it can help, solve our unemployment rate in Ghana. But it's left there in the hands of a few people, and they are engaging in it uncontrollably. There's a man who have a small recovery, mineral recovery, like urban mining in Tema. If you see the amount of copper this man harvests from e-waste that he collects from even ECG alone, Electricity Company of Ghana alone, and other companies, it will marvels you the kind of money the man is making out of it. And there's a demand, a total demand for it. When I visited him and he said the demand is so high in such a way that he cannot even meet the demand. He can do, 4 containers or 5 containers of copper alone in a month when he get the e-waste. So I think it's enough. There are enough, economic benefit and social benefit. And also the data distraction is what people don't know. So basically, the data distraction is where people fear that if I give my gadget to you, my laptop, my what, there are specific data in them that I need to protect. So data distraction, what we do is that we go on site. We can do it off site and on site, where data are we transfer the data to you, and we destroy your SSDs, your hard drive, and are very good. Because we use drills, we use other equipment technology to destroy the data in front of you. And we collect after the data is destroyed on this gadget and is properly transferred to you. We take the gadget to the processing plant or the recycling plant for onward recycling. So people are very much critical about data distraction because of how information, is very critical in this dispensation. So if you leave guard your information, if you leave guard your information processor, it might jeopardize your business. It might jeopardize your work, and can create a whole lot of problem for even a household. Imagine you just indiscriminately give your phone out with data on it, and it is not properly destroyed, and or data is not properly protected and transferred, and well protected. You could imagine the kind of distraction or the kind of problem or challenges that is going to degenerate into. And so this is what I have been trained, and we add it onto our e-waste management, which make it a little bit professional. Because like I said earlier, people want to give this gadget out, but because of the data, because of the information they have on these gadgets. They feel very reluctant to give it out for recycling. So they pack it in their storerooms, they pack it in their house, and it creates all manners of health conditions and health problems for them. And so the challenges are enormous. We cannot, tackle it, on this platform, but we are open for engagement. We don't know it all because, like I said, it's a gray area. We need more training, more capacity building training, more workshop, more seminars, more conferences to attend so that we can learn the best practices from other countries, other sector players, so that we can properly implement e-waste management and data extraction and management in Ghana.
Okay, thank you so much, Felix. Apologies for the interruption, for cutting you short, but otherwise we are running out of time for the other panelists and to leave some time for questions.
No problem.
And well, our final presentation will be by Martín Lallana. And we wanted to ask Martín what could be the role of mineral recycling to cover the demand for raw materials for the green transition, more concretely in the case of the Spanish state. Martín, the floor is yours. Okay, thank you very much, Julia and Odege, for the invitation, and thank you to the other panelists. As Julia was saying, I will be focusing mainly on two research papers that I participated in last year. Both were published in December 2023 and in April this year. We have a report by Friends of the Earth, Minerals for Energy Transition and Digital Transition in Spain, done by Friends of the Earth and the University of Zaragoza, and the other one which was published in a journal. So basically, through these papers, we were trying to order some of the discussions that were going on in Spain. And on the one hand, we wanted to have some detailed figures as to the demand for metals linked to the public policies for the energy and digital transition in Spain between now and 2050, and not just data based on far-fetched hypothesis, but rather based on the energy and climate plans, the Spanish 2050 decarbonization plans, to look at this in public policy documents. So based on that, we wanted to come up with estimates as to how much of this demand could be met through recycling raw materials and which part of the demand had to be fulfilled through primary extraction. And so based on that, we tried to show alternatives of circular economy so that we could increase the recycling rate so that more demand can be met through recycling, and also to reduce demand in absolute terms. And we wanted to have the information to look at the environmental impact of extraction and to some elements of global justice, so that there's an equitable distribution of mineral reserves. It's quite ambitious, and I'm sure that I'll try focusing on the main elements in my presentation. So to carry out this study, what we did was to focus on 6 areas of technology. That is the most relevant ones when talking of digital and energy transition. It has to do with the generation of renewable electricity sources, electric mobility, which, as we will see, has a specific weight, some elements of green hydrogen, energy storage, and technological devices, which was also covered by the 2 previous panelists. We focused on 10 metals that are more relevant in terms of the fact that they're considered as critical raw materials by the European Union, because there's a movement in granting mining licenses in Spain for the reserves of these metals, and because they are used intensively. So trying to summarize what we did, we started off using official policy documents, looking at what are the estimates in terms of number of electric vehicles for 2030, what will be the wind energy installed plan for 2050. So based on that, we arrived to some technology scenarios, which we then compared with estimates in terms of the type of technologies that will be used, the type of batteries that will be used, the type of solar panels that will be used. I mean, the technologies that will be used will determine the minerals used in the different technologies. And we also, in order to avoid being too pessimistic, we tried also including trends in terms of technology improvements in the sense of the mineral intensity. That is, the solar panels produced 20 years ago carried a huge amount of silver. Nowadays, it would be unthinkable. So the amount of silver has been reduced historically over these 20 years. So it would be irrational to think that in the future there won't be improvements too in the number of minerals used. And maybe the part that has greater uncertainty is, on the one hand, having estimates on the recycling rates of those minerals based on those technologies in the current moment, and what would be the maximum, realistically, what would be the maximum recycling rate. So we want to know how much of the recovery rates and then the recycling rates in 2050, sorry. And based on all of this data and all of this information, we've been working on different scenarios. And then we abstractly made two hypotheses that I think should be taken into account. What we're trying to do is to measure the demand linked to the energy transition in Spain, as if the demand for metals was supplied from Spain, which doesn't happen now. What happens now is that Spain is importing an electric vehicle that has a battery in it. The battery was produced in a different country, so the lithium demand isn't considered as a lithium that is demanded by the Spanish market. So we want to take responsibility for the demand of raw materials in the Spanish state, and we tried comparing this with the elements that are recycled when the product reaches the end of its life cycle. So based on these two hypotheses, we've been working basically on three different scenarios. There's a first scenario where, on the one hand, we envisage that the energy transition goes through as set in the public policies, and that we're able to achieve optimal recovery and recycle rates, so gradually between now and 2050. Then we also said, okay, so there's an energy transition, but what would happen if the recovery and recycling rates weren't achieved? And the third scenario is that we go ahead with the energy transition as set out in policy documents, but then we accelerate recycling and reach optimum levels in 2030 instead of 2050. We lengthen the useful life of technologies. I think solar panels have a 20-year life cycle. We imagine they lasted for 30 years, and we were able to stop larger batteries and e-vehicles, so that we were able to give a new use to e-vehicle batteries to produce energy, and an alternative mobility strategy. That would be the third scenario. So instead of transitioning from combustion engine vehicles to e-vehicles, what we do is reduce the fleet from 25 million today to 9 million. So it would entail a different model of mobility, which would go hand in hand with a drastic increase in public transport, multiplying by 3 the number of electric buses, just to see what may happen with these different alternative scenarios. So looking at the outcomes of our study, in the basic scenario, what we would see is that a large chunk of the demands for those 10 minerals is dominated by electric mobility. That's one of the strong points in our study. So if we're talking of raw materials for energy transition, we're not talking about so much about solar or wind energy. We're talking mainly about electric mobilities. It would be mainly private cars, electric cars. So we'll be looking at minerals like lithium, cobalt, tin, and manganese, and more than half of the demand from aluminium and copper would be stemming from this e-mobility. So that's one of the strong outcomes of our study. Secondly, out of these 3 scenarios, what we see is mainly that if we take the baseline scenario, the one in the middle, and we have an energy transition and we improve recycling rate, if we don't improve recycling rates, what would happen is that the part of the demand that you have to cover with primary extraction would be 40% higher than if you are able to improve recycling rates. So not improving recycling will require much greater primary extraction that could be avoided. Secondly, what happens if we are able to recycle all of these batteries and we enter into a circular economy? 2 things would happen. On the one hand, we would reduce the total demand for minerals by 34%. This part of the demand would simply vanish. And from the proportion linked to primary extraction, we would be able to reduce this up to 50%. That would happen if there's an energy transition and optimal recycling rates. And in general terms, 67% of the total demand for those metals would be covered through recycling, which is the scenario that Friends of the Earth highlighted as the optimum solution. But I also think it's interesting to look at these results in a dynamic way, not just as a snapshot where we describe in a summarized way the evolution over 30 years, because the rhythm at which all of this happens gives us more detailed information. And what I am trying to convey here is that we're looking at each of these metals. We're looking at how demand evolves from 2020 to 50 in the scenario of energy transition and high recycling rates and the optimum alternative. What we see is that when we look at the efficiency parameters, there's an increase of demand from 2020 to 2030 to make this energy transition possible, because in 2025 there will be no lithium to recycle because there is no lithium in the economy in 2025. So the lithium demand increases initially, and then we are able to stabilize the demand to curb the demand a bit due to e-mobility. We're also able to curb the increase in demand, and we are seeing how recycling can cover a greater chunk of this demand. During the first decade, it only meets 20% of the demand for some metals, but it's in the decade from 2030 to 2040 where recycling can cover greatest demand, and by the end of 2040 it represents more or less 50% of the demands for different metals. And from the decade from 2040 to 2050 we have much more technology that have entered the market, which will be reaching the end of their useful life, and we can recover these raw materials. So we have 3 different periods, 3 different decades. And this is something we see with greater clarity by looking at the demand for each mineral. And together with this, we've compared it with 2 things. On the one hand, we said we are not alone in this world. Spain is a state from the global north. And if we looked at the kilotons of nickels would be required for the energy transition in Spain with the global reserves, we would see that if we can distribute these reserves by population, and looking at the fraction of the Spanish population in terms of comparing it to the global population, and we compare it to the primary extraction levels, what we see is that based on the different scenarios, in most cases, cobalt, lithium, and nickel, mainly linked to electric mobility, are the ones that shoot over the equitable global reserve distribution. And we are almost able not to overshoot this if all of the sufficiency circular economy measures were implemented. A second comparison we made, where we looked at different environmental impacts, energy consumption, and emissions. When we talk of the extraction of these metals, it's not just what is included in technology that is highly refined until you get the lithium and the gold into the electronic vehicle or the electric or electronic device. It had to be extracted from the mine, and much more than the mineral is taken from the mine. There's important and significant amounts of rock taken out from the mine. So we wanted to reflect the amount of mineral extracted and the amount of rock. I think in 2050 they would have to mobilize or transport annually to meet the demand scenario. If there is a transition and recycling improves, we would be mobilizing 2 large vessels, which would be linked to 636 large vessels of rock. And if recycling isn't improved, then you need more than 1,200 ships full of rock extracted. But if we're able to increase the demand that is met through recycling, we would be able to reduce it to 136 vessels, which is also significant. And to conclude, within the time I was allocated, we have a set of conclusions. The main idea is that when we talk of the demand for metals in energy transition, basically we're referring to electric mobility, that if we have ambitious recovery and recycling systems, we would be able to cover up to half of the demand for the different metals by 2050. This is a big if we have ambitious systems for recovery and recycling. And if we add measures for circular economy and sufficiency that would transform the mobility system, then we would be able to reduce half of the metals that would have to be extracted from the mine, and we could use recycling much more while reducing demand. And in any case, the energy and digital transition as is planned for the Spanish state today has some problems in terms of justice, environmental justice, because lithium and cobalt would have to be extracted in much larger amounts. And then we have some recommendations or elements that we would have to work on more. We need to work in a much more centralized way on the future of mobility, on the transformation that would allow us to reduce the use of private cars, carry out, to promote and plan the development of an urban mining industry that is able to meet the recovery and recycling rates, to carry out an analysis of the demand for metals in the rest of the economy, which in many cases is quite higher than what we are referring to here. That is the case of copper and aluminium. Energy transition isn't where greatest demand lies. There's a greater demand in certain industrial manufacturing sectors, construction, and other areas. We have to integrate this, bearing in mind the dynamics of economic growth and issues of economic structure. And last but not least, we cannot forget about the environmental impact of recycling. It's not harmless, and the energy consumption and the emissions and the chemicals used for recycling are quite large. And we hadn't considered this in our study, but we must be mindful of this as well. So that would be all on my side. Thank you very much.
This has been highly interesting. All three presentations have taught us a lot. The problem is we're running short of time for the questions. I'm going to group them, and we're going to have a round, one last question, including all of them. So I would like to have one answer from each of you three. I would ask you to answer in just 2 minutes, please. For all, they are asking, what do you think that your urban mining is an alternative to the current extractive system? And specifically for Clàudia, do you think that degrowth could also be a good measure to be added to the list that to be promoted? Yes, absolutely. I didn't mention degrowth because I was running out of time, but degrowth would be the ultimate framework within which we should engage and perform. This is where we need to be heading at all levels, at a cultural level, at understanding that happiness is not only met through material means, but there are many other needs that are more important for our happiness. Social needs, for example, and then public policies, of course. Things that are not really necessary, that are not contributing to common good, should not be produced anymore or not be produced so largely. So the answer is clearly yes. For Martin, maybe the more general question, can we say that urban mining is the way to go as an alternative to the current extractivist system? And we were also asking that there was a question about public policies in Spain on circular economy, and also would this have a link with degrowth as well? What do you think about this concept? Urban mining as an alternative to extractivism has to be one of the parts or of a much bigger or broader transformation. We're talking about a big energetic transformation project. So it's energy, it's an economic structure model change by reducing the demand of raw materials and a transition with an alternative mobility model, alternative energy models. When we talk about urban mining, we talk about recollection and recycling. This is all it's done, but there is a long process involving more than collection and recycling. So reducing the extraction is also an important measure. The degrowth framework should be the framework within which we should focus our policies. Yes, we should improve our recycling procedures. Yes, we should have tax incentives for the purchase of new sustainable fuel vehicles. However, there is no consistency when it comes to degrowth, and there is a need for degrowth. Thank you very much for Martín. I think it's clear enough now. I believe we lost Felix, and that's too bad because his answer would have been really interesting because he wanted to show a bit of his presentation. Maybe he can send it to us, and then we can forward it to everyone who participated in the webinar, so you can see his presentation together with the other presentations we saw in the webinar today. I guess we'll leave it here. So thank you very much to Martín, Clàudia, Felix, even if he can't hear us, and all of you who have been following from your homes. I hope you found this webinar interesting. So we encourage you to follow our ODG and also SETEM social networks. It's been a pleasure. Thank you to all of you.